Let's take a look at some of the other information that we can get in the output of the show interfaces command. We might see a variety of errors, and this can help us with troubleshooting. Some of these errors can point us to look in a particular direction in our troubleshooting. For example, we might see a runt. What is a runt? Well, a runt is a frame that's too small. Well, not only too small, a lot of people would just say that it's a frame that's too small, but in addition to being too small, it has a bad CRC, a bad cyclical redundancy check. Here's the way that works. When a frame is transmitted, the transmitting switch does a calculation, a mathematical algorithm on that frame. Generically, it's called an FCS, a frame check sequence, and a CRC, a cyclical redundancy check, is a type of frame check sequence. So we're going to do a CRC calculation on this frame, and we send it to the far side. It receives the frame. It does the CRC calculation also, and if the CRCs match, then that's a pretty good indication that the frame has not been modified in transit. It's not been degraded in any way. We received the same thing that was sent. A CRC is a way to determine that. Well, if we have a runt, our frame is too small, and what does too small mean? It can vary depending on the medium we're using, but on an Ethernet network, less than 64 bytes is considered too small, and it has a bad CRC. At the opposite end of the spectrum, we might have a giant. A giant is a frame that's too big for the medium, and it also has a bad CRC. And for Ethernet, and we're talking about non-jumbo Ethernet, this is traditional Ethernet, there are options for making the frame size much larger in an Ethernet network. We can have what are called jumbo frames. We're not talking about that here. We're just talking about a regular Ethernet network where the frame size maxes out at 1518 bytes. If the frame is larger than that and it has a bad CRC, that's a giant. And we can see totals. We can see the total number of input errors, the total number of output errors associated with an interface. And as you can see on screen, the input errors, we're summing up things like the number of runts that we have, the number of giants, no buffer, CRC, frame, overrun, and ignore errors. The output errors, that's the total number of errors that kept our packet from being transmitted. We've talked already about collisions. That can show up in the show interfaces output. This is the number of times that we had a couple of stations transmit at about the same time on the same shared Ethernet segment. And this is a common thing if we're running in half duplex mode and we have multiple stations sharing an Ethernet segment. It's not very common in switches because normally in switches we can run in full duplex mode. We don't even run CSMA-CD, carrier sense multiple access with collision detection. Collisions don't occur usually. Late collisions. What is a late collision? Well, it's a collision that occurs later in the transmission of a frame. Now, what do we consider to be late? Well, technically, late means greater than the medium's slot time. There's a new term for it. What is a slot time? Well, think about a fast Ethernet network as an example. If we're running unshielded twisted pair, category 5, and we have a fast Ethernet network, what's the maximum distance between a couple of switches, theoretically anyway? It's 100 meters. Well, a slot time is twice the time it takes for a bit, an electrical pulse, to be sent over that maximum distance. To give you a few examples, that slot time would be 51.2 microseconds on 10 megabits per second Ethernet, 5.12 microseconds for fast Ethernet, and 4.096 microseconds for 1 gigabit per second Ethernet. And we've already defined what a CRC is. This is the number of times that calculation, the cyclical redundancy check calculation, doesn't match between the transmitter and the receiver. That's an indication that the frame has been corrupted. What could cause this kind of frame corruption? Let's talk about a couple of the more common answers to that question. One is a media issue. We're transmitting over copper, we're transmitting over fiber, and something with the media caused us to have errors. For example, with copper, we might have the wrong category of cabling. Maybe we're trying to do 10 gig Ethernet over category 3 as an example. That's not going to work out too well for us. It could be that the cable is damaged. I remember once that an office administrator was telling me that their computer had intermittent connectivity with the internet. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. When I went in there to check it out, I noticed that she had the cable for her computer running under her chair mat. Have you seen these plastic chair mats with the big spikes in the bottom so they stick down into the carpet? Well, this cable was running the gauntlet of these spikes, and some of the spikes are actually going into the cable, and where she had rolled back and forth over this cable with her chair, it was flat. I mean, the insulation was broken, things were frayed. It was in horrible condition. It was amazing that it worked at all, but we could have a damaged cable. One of the common things that can happen to an RJ45 connector is that little tab on the connector gets broken off. You're trying to pull the cable through a bunch of other cables, and in doing so, that little tab catches on something and it snaps off. And you push it into the computer or the switch and you think, oh, that still works. Well, it might look like it's all the way in, but if that little tab is broken off, it's happened to me many times, you might not have good connectivity. With fiber optics, a common thing that happens is we bend the fiber more than it should be bent. There's a minimum bend radius for different types of fiber. Remember how fiber optics work? We have a different index of refraction in the core and the cladding of the fiber, and we were talking about how the light would bounce off the cladding and bounce back into the core because the indices of refraction were so different. Well, if you bend the fiber, that doesn't happen as well. If you bend the fiber, some of the light escapes from the core into the cladding, thus degrading our signal. And another really common issue that we might have in our switched networks is having a duplex mismatch. One side is set to half duplex, one side is set to full duplex. Let me show you some indications in the output of the show interfaces command that can point to a duplex mismatch. Let's go out to the live interface. Let's say that users on this network have been complaining about slow speeds. Things are working, but things are slow. When I hear that a network is running slow, one of the first things I think of is having a duplex mismatch. Here's a quick way to check that, or a quick way to get some hints that we might be having a duplex mismatch. If we do our show interfaces command, and I'm going to focus in on fast Ethernet 1/0/2, that's the interface leading from SW1 up to SW2. Let's take a look at some of these counters that we've just talked about. I'm noticing in this output that I have no CRC errors. Well, that's good, but I have thousands of late collisions. Yikes, that does not sound so good. I've got late collisions on one side of the link. What does the other side of the link look like? Let's go to SW2 and let's do a show interfaces gigabit 0/10. On this side of the link, we don't have any late collisions, zero late collisions, but we do have thousands of CRC errors. This is a textbook indication of having a duplex mismatch. You might want to put that in your notes. When one side of your link has a high number of CRC, or on some switches it might say an FCS, frame check sequence errors, remember that we're talking about the same thing. CRC is a type of FCS. It might show up as CRC, it might show up as FCS, but it's our checksums that are not matching up on both sides of the link. One side has high CRC errors, the other side has high late collision errors. That's indicative of a duplex mismatch. And the side with the high CRC or the FCS errors, that's the full duplex side. And the side with the high late collision errors, that's the half duplex side. Let's confirm that. We can do a show interface status just to make sure that gigabit 0/10 is indeed running in full duplex. It is. My guess is if we go and look at fast Ethernet 1/0/2 on SW1, it's going to be running in half duplex because of all the late collisions we're receiving. Let's do a show interface status. Fast Ethernet 1/0/2, yeah, it's running in half duplex. It auto-negotiated it. Do you remember why? The other side was hard-coded to full. Full duplex ports do not participate in duplex negotiation. Since the other side was not going to play along, this side, SW1 said, I'm not able to negotiate with the other side, so I'm just going to default to half duplex. We can fix that. Let's go into interface fast Ethernet 1/0/2, and we'll simply say duplex full to try to rectify that problem and to make sure that our counters get cleaned out so the next time we issue the command show interfaces we're not going to see those residual counters. We can do a clear counters command and say yes, we want to clear those out. Now when we do a show interface fast Ethernet 1/0/2, we've cleared out the errors. And if we give the command in a few minutes, hopefully we're not going to see any more of those late collisions because I think we just resolved the issue.